Good afternoon, everybody. I am Alyssa Avant, and my blog is at alyssaavant.com. You can see my name, how it's spelled on here, because I don't pronounce my name the way that it is spelled. So you'll want to look for that in order to get the right URL. Over there, I write a lot about my faith, and I write about fear, and I write about anxiety some, and I just write about my about walking with the Lord as well. So it is just a pretty new blog, and I have a lot of big plans for it, but it is fairly new for right now. So anyway, today we are here to talk about the topic of marriage, and we have been doing that here in this group, reclaiming hope and joy, especially in your marriage. And so I am here to talk about the same thing, and I titled today's live Marriage and Control, but from a different angle than you might think. My experiences with that are from a different little bit of an angle than you might expect. So I have my cheat sheet of what I'm supposed to talk about. And so I wanted to, get started on the specific topic of marriage and control, but from a different angle. So I have been married for 17 years this past June. So it's almost been 17 and a half coming up. I got married when I was 19 years old. My husband and I did not date very long before we were engaged. It was like, one of those whirlwind kind of romances. I was 18 and he was 24 at the time, and he asked me 3 months after we started dating, and I said yes, but my parents, who wanted me to be sure, asked that I wait a year to get married because I was so young, and so that's what I did. And so we had dated a year and 3 months by the time we were married. I was in college. He was working because he is 7 years older than me. And we had what we wanted at the time. We wanted to wait several years before we had children so that I could get out of college. I found out the day before my college graduation I was expecting our first child. And we then went on to have 2 more children later. My kids are 13, 10, and 9 right now, and I have boy, girl, boy. So we have always had a pretty solid marriage. I feel blessed to be able to say that. Early on in my marriage, one of the things that and one of the reasons I married my husband was because he shared my feelings and my convictions about going to church and about having a Christian family. I had previously in high school dated someone actually a lot longer than I dated my husband, and they did not share those convictions. They did not share that feelings about the importance of a relationship with Christ and the importance of attending church. And so that was really a deal breaker for me with that relationship. And so one of the things that won me over with my husband early on was when I asked him to go to church, and he went the first time I asked him. And that had not happened previously in one of the only relationships long-term I really had, as I was dating in high school. So that was a really big deal, and other people noticed that or knew that because we were actually introduced by other people. And they actually told me that it was going to be a match because he goes to church. So I thought that was a pretty good indicator. That's always been a staple in my life. It's always been really important in our lives. And so I, as a teenager, growing up, I grew up in church. And so that was always really, really important. So I needed that to be important in a spouse as well. So that was a really big reason why I felt that he and I were compatible from day one. So early on in my marriage, I also became we got into the ministry. I had felt called to ministry for a really long time. So we had I had applied and was accepted and asked to come and serve as a youth and children's director at a local church. And another thing for me in my marriage is that I wanted my husband to be on board with the things that I felt God was calling me to do. And an indicator for me was always, if he was on board, I felt more like that was what God was really wanting me to do. It was, harder for me if he wasn't on board with the plans that I felt like God was leading me to do, because I always felt like if Greg's not on board, then maybe God isn't really showing me this. Not that everything's supposed to be easy. I just felt with a Christian spouse that we should be on the same page about those types of things. And they always joked at our church when I was serving that they got a 2-for-1, because Greg really was a huge part of the ministry that we had there. And so that was a blessing, a huge blessing. We served there 5.5 years, and I really, really enjoyed our time there. So honestly, I didn't have a lot of issues in our marriage at all, but the issues that I had were more so in my mind than they were actually present in our lives. So I had to explain that. That's why I said marriage and control, and it's a different angle than you might expect, because my issues in my marriage were all in my head. And so I have to explain that a little bit. I know that that's hard to understand, but I feel like there's probably other people out there who may be dealing with the same things. Many of us in this world struggle with anxiety and fear, and I actually am writing a Bible study on that. And one of the things that as I was researching, I found out that Billy Graham has a quote about that, and he, that we live in a world where anxiety is, an anxious world. And he actually said that in 1965. And it's so true today that our world and our time that we're living in could be known as, the time of anxiety, because there is so many things weighing on our minds and vying for our attention and all of that. So I wanted to share with you that was what it was for me. So even though you could not see issues, you could not see problems, I had them, but they were in my mind. That your mind is very powerful, and Satan has his way sometimes of putting thoughts in your mind. And so how I discovered this was recently, in the past couple of months, I was hospitalized due to, I had gotten pneumonia. And I had not ever had a serious illness before. I'd never been in the hospital before more than a couple days to have a child and come home. And so during that time, I was able to see God. I feel like it was completely a God thing, because it gave me the opportunity to be quiet and be still and actually hear from God. Whereas many times we are so busy, even if we are telling ourselves we need to be still, we need to be quiet, we need to listen to the Lord, it's hard to do. And I was am a really busy mom, and a really busy business owner, really busy. You can keep naming all the hats that we wear in our lives. And I had all those hats on, and it was really hard for me to ever be still enough to realize the struggles that I was having. And like I said, the struggles affected my parenting, it affected my marriage, it affected my everyday life. And it was the struggle that I was having was about control. And so the reason I wanted to share about this as a part of my marriage was because that was what was affecting my marriage, even though I did not realize it. So I have always had I've always had an anxiety disorder. And so I had been diagnosed as a child, and I have a generalized anxiety disorder. And if you know anything about anxiety, it makes your heart race, it makes you feel like your insides are shaking. And there's usually things that trigger your anxiety. And so for me, a couple of those things were finances, and the other thing was a lack of control or conflict. I didn't want conflict in my life. I didn't want conflict in my marriage. And the financial aspect would oftentimes cause conflict, for which I tried to steer clear of. So in other words, what I did was, in order to feel and continue to feel in control at all times and feel like I had it all together and that everything was great, I covered up things in my marriage. I covered up situations from my husband in order for us not to have an argument, for everything to remain calm. I've always been a peacemaker. I was always the peacemaker in my family growing up. I wanted everything to remain calm. And so I would control the situation. I would try to control the money. I would try to control whether or not there would be a conflict or not. And so I had this huge complex about making my husband upset. And so I didn't want to make him upset. But somewhere in my mind, I had decided, and a lot of times, you know, Satan has his way on this. Somewhere in my mind, I had decided, if I upset him enough, whether it be about money or whatever it was, if I let go of the control and I upset him enough, he was going to leave. I had this complex that he was going to leave. And in the last year or two, especially, I've really had that complex. And one of the reasons that I believe that to be true is because I've had a lot of friends get divorces lately, be divorced. And that was, you know, that is like one of my biggest fears. And I don't want that to happen. And though my husband never gave me any indication of doing that, it was something that I wanted to make sure didn't happen. So I would control the situation. I would, you know, keep things from him regarding the finances so that he wouldn't get upset with me, or I would work really, really hard to make up money when I felt like we needed it, so that I didn't have to say no to him in many situations. Like, I was dealing with the finances. I was the person that wrote the checks and paid the bills and balanced the checkbook and all that stuff. And so if I balanced it and it wasn't enough, you know, I tried to find a way to work harder to make the money, because I am a business owner. So I was able to do that by you know, finding another client or doing another project. And so I did that, and I was running myself ragged and insane. So one of the reasons why I got sick in the first place was because I was constantly in this mode of, I've got to be in control, if that makes sense. So I wasn't honest with him about the finances. I wasn't honest with myself about the situation and how bad it was or how good it was. So it, you know, it had affected me more so than him, but it had affected us. And after I was in the hospital several days, I had time to spend thinking and praying and hearing from the Lord. And that's what I was told. You are killing yourself trying to control your life, and it's specifically my marriage. And so one of the things I had to do was I had to let go of the tight reins that I had on it, and I had to give Greg insight into what was actually going on, the bills we actually had, the debt we actually had, the situation where we didn't always have enough money to pay all the bills. And, you know, I needed him to have some control in that situation instead of me controlling that. So I held on to it so tight, and I needed to let that go. And I was able to let go of that control and save myself so much heartache, save myself so much worry, and, you know, I don't even know how to explain it. It bogged my life down. It was miserable, and I was doing it to myself, and I did not realize that until after I spent those few days in the hospital and God opened my eyes to that situation. So the lesson here, and the lesson that I learned, is you have to be 110% honest with your spouse, and you have to be 110% honest with God and with yourself. And you have to realize when you are doing more than you are capable of, and when you are not allowing others to help you, when you are not allowing God to help you, and when you need to let go of some control in your life. So maybe this affects you. Maybe you understand what I'm talking about. And I pray that you will pray, and that you will kind of search your soul, search your heart, to see if this is something that is affecting you and your marriage. May not be in the same way. It may be in other ways than the topics that mine affected. But I feel like it is something that more than just me deals with. And so I just had, that is a really candid, open, honest report of where I was just recently and how I overcame that obstacle in my marriage. And that's probably the biggest obstacle we've ever had and ever had to deal with. And it was difficult to do. But I'm really thankful that it happened. And I'm thankful that I'm able to see now what I was allowing to control me, even though it was all in my head. And so many times that's the case. So many times that's the case. You just have to be honest with yourself. So I know that everybody has a different story when it comes to their marriage, and I just pray that my story has helped someone in some way. And I pray that this party, this Reclaiming Hope and Joy in Your Marriage, will be a blessing to everyone. And I'm excited that I've been able to participate. Thanks so much, Tiffany, for getting it together. Bye-bye.